So thank you. Welcome to the Historic Society of Lancashire and Cheshire's November meeting. And we are delighted to welcome members of CILIP's Local Studies Group who are going to speak to us this afternoon about their local history toolkit. Thank you for joining us. I'm delighted to welcome in particular Tony Pilmer and Terry Bracher, who are going to take us through presentations. We will have time at the end for questions. We also do have some local expertise here from Lancashire Record Office. We're very fortunate there. So if you have any questions that relate to Lancashire records, Hannah Turner may be able to assist us there. So that's all I wanted to say. I'll hand over now to Tony, who's going to start. Thank you, Tony.
Right. Thank you very much. Let me just do the embarrassing thing of starting my PowerPoint presentation. And while I'm doing that, I will have to give you an admission. I'm no longer a local studies librarian. So that's the one great thing, is that when everybody asks all these embarrassing and difficult questions at the end, I can say, I haven't a clue. Hopefully people won't work out that I'm the librarian and archivist at the Royal Aeronautical Society and ask me questions about aeroplanes. Right, so for my sins, I'm the editor-in-chief of the CILIP Local Studies Toolkit, and the theory today is we're going to say a little bit about local studies, who we are, what do we do. We'll then talk you through the toolkit as it is online, and we'll highlight 3 different sections of the toolkit with parts from with lectures, talks, discussion points from the people who actually wrote the sections themselves. So, what on earth is local studies? Well, basically, it's the department in a public library service which is dedicated to collecting and facilitating, I'm sorry to use that word, but it is the best, facilitating the use of library materials dedicated to your area. Library materials, it's a bit bland, it's a bit general. It's basically everything we can steal away from the archivists. I always like to think of it as the National Library or the National Collection for your patch. So you should have a professional librarian, or some places have bands of volunteers, who go out and collect books, magazines, pamphlets, newspapers, photographs, oral histories, anything like that, which has been published or made publicly available, and bring it together in one national collection, their area. But most importantly, it isn't the stuff that is hidden away in the library. It is actually what people do with it. And that is the most important thing I'd like you to take away from today. There are amazing tools, and they're tools for you. They're tools that can be used by different people from your local authority, and they're amazing tools that should be fully used by your community to make a difference, no matter what it is. And you'd be surprised what difference can be made by using our materials. Okay, so what on earth is a local studies toolkit? Well, basically, local studies group traditionally had some guidelines, the kind of, thou must collect newspapers and put them on microfilm. Thou must have a CD-ROM case and a computer to put it in, and file things on index cards. After about 5 years ago, it is getting rather embarrassing. So with the thought of updating it so we can give advice to people, and actually as a website or something that local studies guys can say, this is best practice, this is what we should be doing, especially with those people who are in charge of budgets above them. Not only is it online, but this is breaking news for this event. It's going to be in print. Facet, who's the publishing house for CILIP, has agreed to produce a wonderfully economical publication with the material from our online toolkit in it. So the rough price will be about £20, and you can have your own copy of the toolkit in front of you. Okay, who's it designed for? Well, the obvious thing is people who work in local studies. whether that's those who are absolutely brand spanking new to local studies, somebody who walks in a public authority for their first job like I did, and they said, "Oh, congratulations, you're in charge of local studies." Oh, that's nice. What on earth does that mean? What is a directory? Can I do with all these maps? Well, hopefully you'll be able to find somewhere online that will give you a few tips. It also does help those of us who've been around for a little bit longer to remember exactly what you can do and how you can do it. I must admit, I keep on looking at the copyright section, which I find excellent. And the other thing is, it's an advocacy call, as I said before, especially in the world of problems in finances and local government. If somebody says, right, we don't need to buy newspapers anymore, the local studies guys can say, hang on, the national guidelines say that we need to have newspapers. We need to have newspapers because they chronicle everyday life in our area. And well, in 10 years' time, when you want to have a nice newspaper article explaining how the council succeeded in this most wonderful way, you won't have it if you don't allow us to buy the newspapers. So, who's it designed for? Well, it's the CILIP Local Studies Group. So, it's primarily for local studies guys. We actually had to choose a group of local studies guys we'd aim at, and we chose to use people who were in charge or helped to work in a kind of a large town / unitary authority library. So something you'd expect to have a good selection of material. Unsurprisingly, a bit like Slough. I'm afraid though my grandfather came from St Helens, I'm afraid my Lancashire geography is rather poor. But think unitary authorities. But saying that, we do try and cater it to everybody. So there is a section, for example, on how to coordinate a local study service in a county like the great county of Lancashire. But it may be designed primarily for local studies guys, but there's lots of amazing material that can be used for everybody. Archives, unsurprisingly, and museums are very, we have different traditions, we have different ways of dealing with material, but when you start looking at the grey material that both archives, libraries and museums would fight over, like photographs, we all deal with them in roughly the same way. You've got things like local history groups. So if you wanted to know roughly how to describe photographs, conserve photographs, how on earth you deal with books, that's very useful. Community archives, I won't say much about that because Terry's going to talk about community archives in a little bit. But archaeologists, art groups, family historians, local historians. So if you wanted to know how to use the material inside a local studies library, this is a good place to look at. And you can then sometimes tell the people behind the desk how to do it as well. But I would do such things, obviously. Right, let me take you through the toolkit. This is roughly what it looks like. So if you went to www.localstudieslibrarians.org/toolkit, you'll be given this kind of thing. This is the title page. Well, the title page, I suppose it's more like the contents page of the toolkit. So after a rough introduction and a really very good section on why local studies matters, which I recommend anybody who works in local studies to read, because it is the reason why we do what we do. We look at what local studies librarians do, what you should be doing as a professional librarian, and what you should be doing as an assistant, somebody who hasn't got the qualifications. We then go straight into the most important thing, working with people and different types of people and how we can serve people and make a difference. So we look into the different types of people who use collections, as you can see, and then we look at relationships that local studies collections people have with volunteers. Talks about running volunteer projects, friends groups. It also talks about community archives. This is going into the Radio 2 link. So here to talk to us about Radio 2, about. You have to do the embarrassing now.
Yes. Well, let me talk while Tony's doing that. Let me say that I'm obviously very pleased to be able to talk to you today. Thanks, Tony. why we looked at community archives, I think we were thinking in the toolkit, how do local studies relate to other organisations, and particularly through something called the Alan Ball Awards, which we host and administer on behalf of the Library Services Trust, which is a local history award for best local history publications. We have an E award, which includes lots of submissions from community archives. So we got thinking this will probably be a good area for the toolkit, because there's quite a lot of local history activity, a lot of communities really engaging in local history through what we would call community archives. Tony, can you go to the second slide then, please? Okay, so there's a broad definition created by a wonderful group called the Community Archives and Heritage Group. So there is this wonderful support out there for you. And they say, broadly speaking, people think of projects as community archives either because the subject matter of the collection is a community of people. The classic example is a group of people who live in the same location, but there are communities of interest as well, such as people who worked in a certain profession. The process of creating the collection has involved the community. Typically, this means that volunteers have played a key role, sometimes alongside professional archivists. But I think we can probably sort of slightly improve on that definition, or add to the definition, I would say. So, Tony, this next slide, please. If you can, move to the next slide. Thank you. There you go. So I think what we might add is that, from my perspective, and I think from Local Studies Library's perspective, it's about local communities, local history groups and projects collating and making available information, collections and resources, normally online, creating an archive of material that has often not been deposited with local studies libraries or record offices. I think that's the key thing. Often this material is not being deposited with us. And it's sometimes they enable individuals, families, local groups who are not yet ready to deposit or donate material to a local studies library or archive service and share it with a community of interest. So it's slightly more, I suppose, nuanced for our perspective, but essentially we're talking about online archives, collections of material collected by local communities and local interest groups. Next slide, Tony. There's a wonderful group, as I mentioned, Community Archives and Heritage Group. You don't really need to hear me talk in a way. You could go and find lots of tips on this group's website. It links to loads and loads of community archives. You want to drill down onto the map, you can, to find out those in your local area, which ones are already on. Lots of groups linked to it, lots of community history archives, and there's a real community on there sharing knowledge and information, as well as linking to all the wonderful resources that have been put up there. So there's lots of tips. It's wonderful. So I do recommend that. But of course, I also recommend our own toolkit if you want to sort of a bit of an intro. So I think there's kind of three different types of community history archive, or community online archive. Next slide, Tony. The first I would say is the history and memory of a local community. These generally to be the most popular ones. They tend to be created by local heritage groups, and you'll all have perhaps seen them. They can be small communities right way, such as the Milford Street project there in Salisbury, right way through to a county-wide project like our Warwickshire. Often originate through Heritage Lottery funded grant projects, but essentially they're crowdsourced. They include a wide range of information and formats: photos, blogs, audios, and videos. There's also a second one, next slide, Tony, which is a shared theme or interest. So these are people come together with a particular subject matter in mind, rather than the local community history interest. So this, for example, the Kent Sporting Memory Site is a very small community archive, and expanded to a very broad one for the whole of Kent. I suppose the most obvious ones that we would remember when the time we were commemorating World War I in 2014 to 2018, lots of groups got together, and for example in Wiltshire we produced a community online archive that includes contributions from a whole range of local groups. So it's that kind of archive as well. And the third one, Tony, next slide, is one where you get what I call area-based online portals. Now these have, I guess, less well used nowadays. In the 1990s, late early 2020, early 2000s are quite popular because local history groups didn't have capacity to create their own online archives. And so local studies libraries and archives and heritage organisations would create the space for them. And the advantage is obviously you get standard format, methodical presentation, and it's often arranged by place, although there are periods of time and themes going through them. It requires a bit of editing and arrangement, and I think nowadays, because we can access things like WordPress and other online open source software, this is kind of less well used. But Cambridgeshire is a really good example of that, if you want to have a look at that, and Hertfordshire as well. So next slide, Tony. Why are community archives important? Well, for me, crowdsourced collecting is one of the most important things. It engages local communities with their heritage, giving new insights, and enables people to tell this and share their stories in ways perhaps we couldn't do as local historians and as local studies librarians and archivists. It helps us identify material that is maybe not deposited with the library or archive. And also, in terms of community engagement, it's often driven by a core group. This is a nice picture of the Histon Community Archive Group in Cambridge, Histon Road in Cambridge. And they are the ones who perhaps have a greater insight and a way to enter and get into the local communities far more than local studies librarians can. So it's a really good way of reaching more of the community. Next slide, Tony. So what do local studies librarians and archivists bring to the table? Well, we can advise, we can help you with your collecting policies, we can help you structure your databases and inform your metadata, help you with copyright, as Tony's alluded to earlier. We can talk about funding applications, how you might get funding. Sometimes we're a technology provider. We can provide space or a portal for communities to share and upload, or sometimes we can simply loan equipment for you, audio equipment, for example, or scanning equipment. We can coordinate by bringing communities together. So often we run local history forums. We can bring people together to share knowledge and experience. And we can provide space simply just for people to gather, rooms in our libraries and our buildings to come together and record material. Sometimes we can directly source funding and deliver projects and lead partnerships. And if we're lucky and people feel that they want to deliver or deposit or donate original material to us, then we can provide long-term home for those collections. I'm aware that I'm quite short on time, Tony, but if we can just whiz through the next couple of slides, that'd be useful. So the next slide, please. So in terms of creating a community archive, what should you do? Well, the toolkit, I won't go on too much about this, but the toolkit goes into some detail how you might do this. Obviously, we have open source software, WordPress and Joomla, for example, good examples, and that's quite tempting for groups to use, but it isn't necessarily free because you do have to update that software all the time because some earlier versions aren't supported always, and some of you will obviously know that if you've been involved in that. As local authority organisations, for example, we're often tempted by in-house design, but then we find we're competing with other ICT pressures, other areas of the organisation that want more of the ICT colleagues' time. So we find that can be quite tricky, and also there's a single point of failure when someone leaves. But the other thing, I guess, is there's off-the-shelf community archive packages, and that's really quite interesting. The community sites is a good one, created by Jack Latimer, who originally set up one of the early community archives in Brighton. And so you can buy sort of off-the-shelf package that would perhaps suit all your needs. Next slide, Tony. In terms of collecting, I suppose the toolkit also talks about what is your collecting policy? How are you going to collect? What types of material? What's the geographic spread? Are you going to request things like articles and blogs? What formats are you having? Are you taking photographs? Are you taking other images? Are you using surrogates or these original scans from family archives? Things like that. Also, it talks about the other formats in terms of, do you collect TIFFs or MP3, MP4 formats? Are you collecting JPEGs? Are you collecting WAV formats as well, etc.? So all the different kinds of things that you might think about in terms of digital preservation and the issues around it. And of course, the ethics of editing, because we get lots of, in these archives, you get lots of stories, lots of people's memories. And so what do you do if that information isn't correct? If you know there's a factual error or there's something not quite right, in terms of how much do you edit, because you're actually dealing with someone's personal insight sometimes. So we look on themes like that on the toolkit. Last couple of slides coming up, Tony. Next slide, please. So the challenge, I think, for crowdsourcing collecting for me is that it's difficult to expect people to just submit information to you. You often either need a paid officer in the field or volunteers in the field. You need activities like show and tell events to engage people. And once they're engaged, they'll show their material, they'll help you, they'll perhaps let you scan and add that material to your archive. And I suppose from a local studies perspective, training and supporting community champions is key. Because I said they've got the insight and entrance into the communities where we don't. Again, we mentioned we provide equipment such as audio equipment, scanning equipment. And I suppose the big things are that we help overcome digital exclusion, because it's a really good way of teaching people soft ICT skills if you're unable to get some people to upload their documents, their family archives, and particularly with local studies libraries using being used as hubs for that. Next slide, please, Tony. So just want to finish on sustainability. Just remember that that it's not free, but just because it's free, some websites, some software like WordPress can be free to source. There is a bit of a cost to upkeep them, and we discussed that on the toolkit as well. And I've mentioned before, beware of the single points of failure with in-house designs. Long-term funding, again, is always an issue for local studies libraries and for local history groups. You might get your Heritage Lottery Fund money, but how are you going to pay it down the long run? We discuss ways and techniques how you might source that by building in future proofing in your original funding applications. And also we ask the question, is it just simply better to produce a book? Do you have to have an archive and an online website? And I can leave you with probably that thought, because we'd like to encourage people to deposit original material and things, but also we like to encourage people also to write books as well. And in the Alan Border Wall, we see loads of wonderful community archive books. So it's just a very quick whiz through, and I realize I've gone through at a rapid pace, so I'll be happy to answer questions later. Thanks, Tony.
Right. Okay, thanks very much, Terry. That was great. Okay, back to the toolkit. After the section on engagement, we've got things on planning and priorities. Exciting things like budgeting and emergency planning. But I think the key to virtually anything is actually linking stuff towards the local authority priorities. As with every service in local government at the moment, you need to prove what difference you're making to the community, and more importantly, what difference you're making to the local authority that pays your salary at the end of the month. And on this general theme, we have got perhaps the best, she's not here, I can say this, perhaps the best local studies librarian of our generation is the great Tracy Williams from Solihull, who we've got a recording of talking about not ticking the box. Local studies and meaningful impact. Let's see how this goes.
I don't claim to have all the answers, but I wanted to share what I have learned over
Sorry about that.
more than 30 years of working in archives and local studies, in case it's of any use, and show how some of the projects I've been involved in have aligned with council priorities and have added value to the service. I don't do tick box stuff. That is to say, I try to make sure that what I do doesn't only tick a box, but has real meaning for me and the service, and impact beyond just ticking the box forms. We've all been there, I think, eyes rolling at more strategies and priorities coming down to us when we're flat out just trying to do the day job. And the bad news in one way is that it really is our job, especially in the current climate, to demonstrate to our parent organisation that we have a value for them. We can't afford to be seen as nice but not necessary. The good news is that our area of service is unique, important to the local community, helps colleagues in our organisation to do their jobs, and is valued by many elected members. It's just about tweaking what we do and how we do it. It's not just about doing great stuff. It's about being seen to do great stuff that meets corporate objectives and is valued by the organisation. It may be advisable to concentrate on one or two target areas and demonstrate real impact, rather than making broad claims that are not backed up by robust and specific evidence. It's tempting to try to tick lots of boxes and make claims that are at best a bit tenuous, but this won't stand up to scrutiny. And if you're only doing something to tick a box, your heart won't be in it, which will be evident. The best projects have an authenticity at the heart. Everything we do should have at its core a truthfulness based on our purpose and values. There also needs to be a libraryness embedded into it too. Otherwise, people could, and probably will, question why it's being done in the library rather than the community centre, village hall, post office or pub, all of which will also claim to be at the heart of the community. And those don't require council funding in the same way as libraries. What is it about the library involvement that brings added value? I have some core values and interests that I try to put at the heart of the projects I do. A sense of place at the top of the list. Helping people to feel connected to a place and to each other as a community. Helping them to feel that they belong. Learning and skills development is also a driver for me, and creating something new that is greater than the sum of its parts, especially if it can be done in a way that's eye-catching and uses technology in a creative way. I also try to make projects work hard, so that they don't just do one thing, but can be repurposed for maximum impact and legacy without too much extra effort. I'm going to share a couple of examples that will hopefully show what I mean. Take the subject of visitor economy, important to many authorities. My own authority wanted to capitalise on the visitors using the borough as a convenient base for attractions and events across the Midlands. Everyone wanted a town centre heritage trail, but no one had all of the knowledge or resources to do it alone. I wanted to produce a printed leaflet, but had no budget for printing, so went to the local tourism forum to beg for money, a bit out of my comfort zone, but it worked. The managing director of the local shopping centre and the director of the business improvement district offered to pay. I wrote the text, sourced the images, and roughed out a design which was polished up by the council's in-house graphic designer. On the back of this, the business improvement district wanted a trail to take people around shops and get them looking in the shop windows. We collaborated on a window sticker project with photos from the archives and the brief history of the building displayed in the shop window. For me, bringing the photos and the stories to the exact location where they have most meaning and where the visitor is standing really enhances that sense of place. This collaboration led to further developments, including guided walks during Local and Community History Month and a Then and Now exhibition in the library. I said about making projects work harder and create something new. We have done poetry walks with the poet from the then Arts Council funded West Midlands Contemporary Poetry Organisation, Poetry on Loan. We do a standard group walk led by me or a local historian, then back to the library to look at photos, discuss memories, and suggest lines for a poem. The poet then crafts and either returns for a world premiere performance or sends in a video we can edit for you one second. The council's inward investment team have really jumped on this and want poetry walks for additional areas of the borough. They funded the purchase of wireless audio tour transmitters and receivers for us to facilitate this. The walks have also led to the creation of a Welcome to the Borough local history walk around the town centre, which colleagues in the council's Equality, Diversity and Inclusion team asked me to do during Refugee Week. Some of our new residents who have moved here from Colne. With external funding back in 2006-2007, we ran what we think were the first full-length Caribbean family history courses in the UK. In itself, it would have been a successful project with large numbers of attendees. But when the funding ended, the group carried on meeting at the library as a self-organised group and became a source of expertise nationally and internationally. They were instrumental in the library becoming a family search affiliate in 2011, enabling people locally to order and view microfilm records from around the world. When the microfilm ordering service was withdrawn in 2017, we then got access from library computers to digital records instead. During the COVID lockdown, we successfully made the case for all of our libraries to become Family Search affiliate libraries, the first public library service in the UK to do so. On the subject of courses, we have run beginners, intermediate and advanced family history courses in our libraries for more than 10 years, raising thousands of pounds to help meet income targets. As well as raising income, the courses have promoted library membership and free access to our online subscriptions and built the customer base. As it's our own staff running the courses rather than external tutors, there's an ongoing relationship with the library that lasts beyond the duration of the taught sessions. The impact and added value is that many learners have joined or formed self-organised groups that meet in the library. Members tell us that this has helped with their health and well-being and feelings of belonging. The groups are general support networks for members. It's more than just support with research. The groups also volunteer to help library staff with the delivery of public drop-in sessions, such as this one on researching army answers. Still on learning, I teamed up with a local 3D designer and a group of students at the local college, looking at how historic photos could be used with virtual reality. The students created a prototype of a virtual exhibition based on a self-published book about a local 13th century house that was illegally demolished in the 1960s. I worked with the author on creating an exhibition. She came along with some family members, including her uncle who was in his 90s and was the last family member to live in the house. I mentioned working with a 3D designer. This was a lucky break that started with a chance conversation. He was using the library study space and free Wi-Fi and asked me about old photos of the high street after overhearing me dealing with a customer query. He told me that he was a retired 3D designer and was creating digital scale models of some of the buildings for fun. I basically then kidnapped him for 2 hours. By the time we'd finished talking, he'd volunteered to create a 3D virtual high street based on photos that the council had commissioned in 1948. Our first large post-COVID library event was a Back to the Future event to show this to a capacity pool of 150 socially distanced. During this event, we also explored having an augmented reality building and knew that we wanted to take the virtual high street concept further into virtual reality, but that this would need external funding. The opportunity for external funding came with the National Archives testbed funding during the late Queen's Platinum Jubilee celebrations in 2022. This allowed us to repurpose virtual high street content into a 360-degree animation that could be experienced on VR headsets. We held an afternoon tea during Carers Week 2022 for an invited audience of carers and those cared for, with an opportunity to experience virtual reality, most of them in the first time. Making the content work harder for us, we also then held drop-in sessions for the public during libraries. My experience has been that it's a good idea to keep a mental list of things you want to do. Sometimes they need funding to progress. Sometimes they can be done without much in the way of additional money, but they need time and the right people. My advice is to be bold and brave. Don't be afraid to ask for what you want. If you already have a list in the back pocket of potential projects, you can be quick to respond when an opportunity does come up. It's much easier to tweak existing ideas to fit an opportunity than to think of something from scratch. And if it's something you actively want, it will have that authenticity and libraryness, and hopefully will mean you are enthusiastic about the project rather than it being a chore. Most importantly, don't forget to blow your own trumpet and tell people what you're doing. It doesn't generally come naturally to library staff, but it is absolutely critical, especially in the current climate. Now is not the time to be self-effacing. You can't afford to be seen as nice, but not necessary. It's about being seen to be relevant and a key player in helping the organisation achieve its overall objectives, but doing so in a way that's properly meaningful and authentic, not just jumping on the latest bandwagon, and always including that libraryness that sets us apart. Thank you for your time.
Well, I think they should play that at every single library school, personally. Right, what else can we show you this afternoon?
I don't think
Perhaps not Tracy again. It's good, but not that good. Right, we go in to talk about, as Tracy was talking about the large number of projects she's done, we actually give you some top tips about how doing your own project. Some of the section on creating and running your large projects is based on a big national lottery funded thing, rather than the smaller stuff some of the smaller stuff that Tracy was talking about. But you can draw out lots of stuff from the best practice from that, which you can use for smaller projects, especially when you look at things like evaluation, which is essential for any project. We then move to the marketing sections. Again, as Tracy said, you need to blow your own trumpet and use things like exhibitions and, most importantly these days, social media. So there's some top tips on social media there too. You've got the bread and butter of things. So we all need to know about copyright, and we have a very fine copyright section which kind of points to external resources, especially stuff on the National Archives website that really tells you what you can do with stuff in your collection. And we've also got the Local Studies Library as a Space, which, if I remember rightly, the great Alice Locke, recently departed, put together for us. The guts of the toolkit is the resources section, and this kind of takes you section by section about the type of things you would normally find in a local studies collection, tells you what you can do with them, and tells you other resources related to them. So, for example, I'm a great fan of the Kelly's Directory, the great unsung thing of local history. So I'm going to now bore you for a minute on the Kelly's Directories section. So this is a typical section in the toolkit for resources. You've got a definition of the Kelly's Directory. Trade directories are an early form of yellow pages, providing the names of tradespeople and also give a brief summary of each town and village. They were published from the late 18th to mid 20th centuries. So tells you a little bit about the history of Kelly's Directories. And then we like to give great examples. So we've got a bit from the great town of Datchet, just to the south of Slough. So we can show you roughly what is in each section: a description of the area as it was in the time, the names of the key posh people who lived in the area, and the tradesmen, together with the local facilities in that town. We then take you to the second bit of the Kelly's Directories, which were based in and larger towns from the early 20th century to the later 1960s, depends on which part of the world you're in. So as you can see, this is street by street, just like a census, giving you the head of household of each place. So for the year, if you're trying to track down where relatives or famous people or doing house history, this will give you a real every so often snapshot to fill in the gaps between the censuses if they're available. And we also do give you top tips. So for example, the best thing to do with these borough directories is actually have your borough directory out and your ordnance survey map out, and you can then track what different places were used for and the size of places. You can get a real feeling for an area, especially if you can then connect in the photographs. Many of the hour I had a photograph and a Kelly's directory and a map together in the Slough Public Library. We then give you a flavour of what you can find online. You don't always have to go into your local studies library, because very often you might be doing something miles and miles away from the place that holds the directories. Kelly's directories have been digitised by the University of Leicester, so we've actually been able to embed a video they did to explain how to use their site and tell you a little bit more about the history of directories. Then give some kind of basic stuff on how to look after your material. The preservation and storage section of this is quite small, because it's basically go and look at the books section, and also gives you a flavour about physically how to arrange them. The most important thing is the stuff at the bottom. We really want the Local Studies Toolkit online to evolve, and the only way you can really make anything like this evolve is to get feedback from the people using it. So if you do use it, the Local Studies Toolkit, you spot something that's not quite right, you found something that's new and should really add to it, bung your comment there. The comments will then come to the Local Studies group and the editor, and we can then incorporate the good stuff, because really this type of resource has been started by, I like to say, is the best local studies librarians in this country. Well, those I could blackmail to do some work anyway. But it is a snapshot in time. The last section that we wrote was 2002. So sorry, 2022. So there's good 2-3 years of stuff that's happened since then, and we need to add to it, and we need your help to do so. The bottom of the toolkit, you've got things like cataloging and classification, which is or as is today in the world of the internet called metadata creation, and that is incredibly important. So we go into quite a bit of detail how to describe objects, items, books, etc. And we talk about conservation too. We've also got a section on local studies in Scotland, where the guys from our colleagues in Loch Scott have gone through and shown the differences for the primarily English and Welsh resources we have in the main toolkit, and show you how to access that kind of thing online. One of the amazing things is we've actually, for the first time in about 2 years, we've actually got a brand new section, one I never thought we'd actually put into the toolkit. Local studies in the international context. Local studies librarian for Hertfordshire and Slough. I think of Hertfordshire and I think of Slough. I don't think of the world. But we've spoken to our colleague Jose from ICROM, who have highlighted the toolkit as a good resource for people across the world to learn from. And he's done a wonderful video for us that kind of explains how local is important nationally. So I shall just play his video now.
Hello, my name is Luiz Pederzoli Jr., and I am the manager of the Strategic Planning Unit at ICROM, the International Center for the Study of the Preservation and Restoration of Cultural Property. ICROM is an intergovernmental organization working for 138 member states to promote the conservation of all forms of cultural heritage everywhere in the world. For additional information about ICROM, please visit our website at www.iccrom.org. Sustainable development is an approach to understanding challenges and opportunities, tackling problems, and unlocking the potential that exists in society to create a better future for all. It is more than environmental sustainability, although that's part of it, and it's much more than just using resources carefully. It is about human rights, empowerment, peace building, and more. ICROM's Our Collections Matter initiative was launched in 2020 to accelerate, increase, and amplify activities that support sustainable development through the use, development, and conservation of heritage collections. It does so by providing tools, training, and driving transformation. Museums, libraries, archives, and other collections-based organizations can make many contributions to sustainable development. They maintain and develop collections as a multi-use social resource. They promote education for schools and lifelong. They can support research and sustainable tourism. They can direct their own operations and decisions to support beneficial social, economic, and environmental outcomes. And they can foster and take part in meaningful partnerships. To say it in a short way, collections are a fundamental resource, empowering people to know, to care, and to act. Local studies libraries empower people to understand their communities and how their communities came to be the way they are. From such an informed position, they can collaborate with others to understand current and future challenges and opportunities. Local studies libraries help bring the local to the global and look at global topics through the local lens. In order to understand and unlock the full potential of local studies libraries, we need staff and organizations to be empowered. People are often looking for tools, but don't know where to start. There are lots of tools on the internet, but they are not always so easy to find, and it is not clear how they relate to sustainable development. ICROM's Our Collections Matter online toolkit helps people find tools from the heritage sector and beyond, and then make the connection of how those tools can support sustainable development through collections-based work. In developing the toolkit, we look for good quality, open access tools that can be used in many contexts. CILIP's Local Studies Libraries Toolkit is a very good example of this, and which is why we included it in the Our Collections Matter Toolkit. We hope that the Our Collections Matter Toolkit provides people with understanding and also with encouragement. We very much encourage you to try and use the tools in the Our Collections Matter Toolkit, which you can find on the ICROM website, and also encourage you to tell your story about how you are contributing to sustainable development challenges and working to create a better future for people and nature to thrive through your collections-based. It is said that global just means local everywhere. Local studies libraries working on their own and collaborating can make this a reality for a better, shared future for all. CILIP's Local Studies Library Toolkit can help local studies libraries make concrete contributions to sustainable development and its sustainable development goals, the so-called SDGs of the United Nations 2030 agenda, on a wide range of topics, which include, for instance, providing a basic accessible service for all that relates to the SDGs 1.4, 9.1, 10.2, and 16.10. Providing a welcoming and effective learning environment, which relates to SDGs 4.8, and 11.7. Supporting sustainable tourism, which links to SDG 8.9, supporting research, connecting to SDGs 9.1 and 9.5, developing collections, supporting SDG 11.4, working in partnership with local development plans and partners, in line with SDGs 11B and 17.17, and staff skills and decent work in line with SDG 4.4 and 8.5. They can also support disaster management and risk reduction, which aligns with SDGs 11.5 and 11.B, and provide and promote effective management in line with SDG 16.6. So we are thankful to CILIP for making this tool available and therefore contributing to empowering local studies libraries to realize their full potential as important actors in sustainable development. And we look forward to future opportunities to collaborate towards a sustainable future for all, transforming our world without leaving anyone behind. Thank you so much for your attention.
Great, thank you. Right, now comes that time for questions and comments, and I hand back to Lancashire.
Thank you very much, Tony and Terry, for an absolutely wonderful presentation about the toolkit, what it's been designed for, and how you want to see it move forward. I'm going to stop the recording now,